At my mom's funeral, my dad was off traveling with his mistress. Then at midnight, I got a text, "Come to the cemetery." I'm not dead. I went, and what I saw left me frozen, unable to breathe. My father thought he'd gotten away with murder, and for a heart-wrenching moment, I thought so too, standing at my mother's graveside in the pouring rain. But what he didn't know was that the woman he tried to bury was about to rise from the grave, and I was going to help her expose him. So there I was, standing alone at the edge of my mother's fresh grave, the rain in Seattle coming down so hard it felt like the sky was weeping with me. My heels kept sinking into the mud, like the earth itself was trying to pull me down into that polished mahogany casket. Preservation issues, the hospital had said, best not to view the body. Even then, a part of me felt a cold dread about that closed casket. Mourners huddled under their black umbrellas, their hushed whispers barely cutting through the drumming rain. I caught Aunt Susan's eye across the grave, her face a picture of composed sadness, clutching a wilting bouquet of lilies. But my gaze kept sweeping over the crowd, desperate to find the one person who should have been there. "If you can hear me, Mom," I whispered, "please, give me a sign. Make any of this make sense." Only the relentless rain answered, chilling my neck even under my umbrella. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her, a woman in hospital scrubs, standing apart, watching me. Her expression was unsettling. Not sympathy, more like deep unease. When our eyes met, she quickly turned away, practically running to the parking lot. Something about her felt familiar, but my grief had blurred everything. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I knew I shouldn't check it, not right there at my mother's graveside. But a sliver of desperate hope flickered. Maybe he had a legitimate reason for missing his wife's funeral. The screen lit up. "Sorry, honey, emergency meeting in Hawaii. Call you later. My father. Douglas Hayes." The text blurred as rain splattered on my screen, or maybe it was tears, I couldn't tell. I swiped it away, but then I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the Instagram icon. I knew exactly what I'd find, but I had to see it. And there he was. Douglas Hayes, the respected real estate developer, beaming next to his young assistant, Miranda Voss. They were against a backdrop of swaying palms and a stunning sunset. "New Horizons," the caption read. Posted just 3 hours ago. The image punched me, pulling me back to 3 months earlier. My father's voice, booming through my mother's art gallery after hours. I'd walked in to pick her up for dinner and froze, right in the doorway, at what I was witnessing. "It's part of the company now, Eleanor," he'd yelled, towering over my mother's slender frame. "You signed the papers." My mom, though, she was fierce. "I signed nothing," she'd shot back, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "The gallery stays mine." The funeral director's gentle touch on my elbow pulled me back to the present. "Miss Hayes, whenever you're ready." I nodded, realizing the other mourners were already drifting away. It was time. Time to drop that ceremonial handful of dirt onto the casket of the woman who taught me everything, except how to live without her. The drive home was a blur. Just windshield wipers battling sheets of rain, brake lights glowing red. I took the long way, past Mom's beloved art gallery downtown. That familiar storefront, where she'd nurtured so many local artists, now had this garish banner screaming, "Coming soon, Hayes Luxury Properties." My stomach twisted into knots. Just 2 weeks after her sudden heart attack, her legacy was already being erased. I remembered the way her eyes would sparkle when she talked about her latest exhibition, her passion. Now this. My apartment, usually a refuge with its view of Lake Union, felt utterly hollow when I finally stumbled in, trailing rainwater across the hardwood. I peeled off my soaked coat, kicked off my mud-caked heels, just desperate for something familiar, something comforting. My gaze fell on a framed photo on my dresser, Mom, at her gallery opening 5 years ago, vibrant, beaming, a champagne glass raised high. "You always fought for what was yours," I whispered to her image. Unlike me, I'd spent my entire architectural career at Hayes Development, my father's company, working twice as hard as anyone, just to prove I wasn't some nepotism hire. Always stuck in his shadow, always craving his approval, always dreading his criticism. Then my phone rang. My father's name flashed on the screen. I considered ignoring it, believe me. But 28 years of conditioning, of ingrained obedience, doesn't just vanish overnight, not even on the day of your mother's funeral. Brittany, we need to discuss some necessary paperwork. His voice, all business, as if we'd just stepped out of a boardroom, not just buried his wife. What paperwork? I asked, even though a cold dread was already forming in my gut. I need you to sign some transfers. Your mother's estate. There are formalities. Documents that need your signature as next of kin. I'll have them ready tomorrow. I closed my eyes, picturing him in his Hawaiian hotel, probably still wearing that ridiculous lei from Instagram. I need time, I managed. The silence that followed was deafening. Douglas Hayes didn't often hear the word no, especially not from me. Time is money, Brittany, he finally said, each syllable coated in ice. Tomorrow. The line went dead before I could even respond. Outside my window, thunder growled over Lake Union, lightning briefly illuminating the churning water. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, watching my reflection flicker in the sudden flashes. I won't let you erase her, I whispered to the storm. My phone buzzed again, later, around midnight. I'd been sitting in the dark for hours, rain still lashing against the windows, just trying to make sense of a world without Eleanor Hayes in it. I grabbed my phone, fully expecting another demand from my father. But the contact name on the screen made my breath hitch. Mom. My fingers trembled as I unlocked it. The message seared itself into my brain. I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery, now. I stared at the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. My mother's phone. It had gone missing at the hospital, the nurses had said, misplaced during the chaos of her cardiac arrest. But this was impossible. My hands shaking, I grabbed my coat and keys as lightning flashed again, making grotesque shadows dance on my apartment walls. I practically flew out the door. My windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour as I raced towards the cemetery, tires hissing on the soaked pavement. Seattle was drowning in a midnight storm, turning streetlights into blurred, ghostly halos. Every flash of lightning made me flinch, each one illuminating that impossible message still glowing on my phone. I'm not dead. Come to the cemetery, now. Eleanor Hayes died of a heart attack, my own mother's voice echoed in my head. I watched them lower her casket this morning. Yet, the closed casket, the missing phone, that nurse who wouldn't meet my eyes, it was a puzzle, and the pieces just wouldn't fit. I turned into the cemetery entrance, my headlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. The gates, they should have been locked at this hour. But they stood wide open almost. As if they were expecting me. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I spotted a silver SUV parked near Mom's fresh grave, lights off. A single figure stood beneath a massive oak tree, offering a small shield from the deluge. My heart hammered against my ribs. I parked, killed the engine. The rain pounded on the roof in a deafening crescendo. I fumbled for my umbrella, then just tossed it aside. Would it getting wet even matter anymore? I pushed open the car door and stepped out into the storm. The beam from my headlights caught the figure as I walked closer, and I froze mid-stride. No. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But there she was. Pale, yes, but utterly unmistakable. My mother. Brittany. Her voice carried over the relentless rain, a sound I never, ever thought I'd hear again. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. She took a step forward, grabbing my trembling hand, pulling me towards the SUV. Quickly, she urged, we don't have much time. Inside the SUV, the sudden silence after the storm felt deafening. Mom sat beside me, very much alive, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Water dripped from my hair, my clothes, pooling on the leather seat. How? My voice broke. I reached out to touch her face, half expecting my hand to pass right through her, like she was a ghost. But her skin was warm. Real. Douglas has been threatening me for months, she said, her voice steady, but quiet. He's been tampering with my heart medication. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. My father. Douglas Hayes. The respected businessman, the pillar of the community, the man who raised me, a would-be murderer? Martha Keegan, The nurse you saw at the funeral, she noticed something was wrong. She saw your father switching my pills the day before my supposed heart attack. Mom's fingers twisted together. She helped me fake my death. There was a car accident victim, similar build, similar age. The doctor signed the certificate, thinking he was helping a domestic abuse victim escape. I stared at her, trying to process this unthinkable truth. The closed casket. The hurried funeral. My father's absence, not for an emergency meeting, but to celebrate what he thought was his success. I don't understand, I stammered, my head spinning. Why would he? Mom reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Listen. She pressed play on a recording. My father's voice, clinical and cold, filled the small space. She's worth more dead than alive. Rain still drummed softly on the roof as Mom continued, unfolding a nightmare. Douglas Hayes, respected real estate developer, pillar of the Seattle business community, had been plotting her death for months. And his young assistant, Miranda Voss, wasn't just his mistress. She was his co-conspirator. It's about control of the company, Mom explained. My 41% of shares. With me gone, and you manipulated into signing them over, Douglas would have complete control. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The transfer papers he wanted me to sign tomorrow. The rushed timeline. The Hawaiian business trip that was really a celebration of his successful plot. Martha smuggled me to a safe house outside Portland, Mom continued, showing me documents detailing offshore accounts, a folder of evidence she'd been gathering for weeks. We had to move quickly. I stared at a bottle of pills in her hand. Not her usual heart medication. Foreign tablets, unfamiliar markings. The truth crashed over me with the force of the storm outside. He tried to kill you, I whispered, the words burning my throat. Mom nodded, her eyes never leaving mine. And he would have succeeded if Martha hadn't been paying attention. I thought of every dinner where my father had dominated the conversation. Every family decision he'd controlled. Every time my mother's opinions were dismissed. Years of watching him manipulate us both, making us doubt ourselves, keeping us dependent on his approval. I've been blind my whole life, haven't I? The question emerged as barely more than a whisper. Mom reached across to take my hand, her touch anchoring me as lightning flashed outside the windows. We both were, she said gently. Until now. A tap on the window made us both jump. Martha Keegan stood in the rain, clutching a folder to her chest. Mom unlocked the door, and the nurse slid into the back seat, bringing with her the crisp smell of antiseptic and rain. I brought the updated hospital records, Martha said, passing the folder forward. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp, full of purpose. Security footage shows him entering your room alone the night before. I tried telling the hospital administration, but no one believed me. Your husband has too many friends in high places. Martha risked everything, Mom explained. Her career, her nursing license. She saved my life. I saw what he was doing, Martha said simply. I couldn't stand by and watch. My attorney, Charlotte Wells, connected us with the FBI's white-collar crimes unit, Mom continued. They've been building a case, but we need more evidence of the financial fraud. The weight of what they were asking settled over me. I would need to return home, pretend I knew nothing. Act normal around a father I now knew was capable of murder. He can never know she's alive until we have everything, Martha warned. You'll need to be very careful, Brittany. Your father is watching you closely. The rain began to ease as we formed a plan. I'd return to my apartment before dawn, prepare for tomorrow's meeting with my father. Create a diversion that bought us time. Martha explained how to secretly document anything I found, how to communicate safely. I've seen your father's type before, she said, her voice hard with experience. Men who think they own everything, including the people around them. By the time I drove back toward the city, the first hint of gray was lightening the eastern horizon. I was soaked and shaking, not just from the cold, but from the knowledge now burning inside me. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. 8 a.m. my office. Bring ID for notary. Back at my apartment, I called work with a fabricated illness excuse. I knew my father monitored my office, checking who I talked to, what projects I handled. Today, I couldn't risk his scrutiny. On my dining table, I created a folder labeled Mom's Estate with dummy documents, just enough to look legitimate if he searched my apartment. The weight of knowing my father was capable of murder pressed down on me with each breath. But for the first time in my life, I saw through his manipulation clearly. The way he'd always positioned himself as the authority, the decision-maker, the one who knew best. How easily I'd accepted his version of reality, even when it contradicted what I saw with my own eyes. Dawn broke fully as I changed into dry clothes. My movements were mechanical. In a few hours, I'd sit across from my father and pretend I didn't know he was a murderer. I'd smile and nod and play the dutiful daughter, all while looking for evidence to bring him down. It was terrifying. But for the first time, I was seeing the world and my father with absolute clarity. Rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of my father's corner office, the sound a relentless backdrop to my racing heart. I stood before his imposing glass desk, trying to appear composed while my fingers trembled slightly against my thigh. The Seattle skyline beyond the windows was barely visible through sheets of water, the city swallowed by the same storm that started the day we buried my mother's empty casket. Douglas Hayes looked immaculate in his tailored navy suit, not a hint of jet lag despite his overnight flight from Hawaii. His silver hair caught the harsh fluorescent lighting as he slid a leather folder across the glass surface. "Everything's prepared," he said, voice measured and professional. "Standard transfer documentation for your mother's assets. Just your signature needed here." He tapped a manicured finger against a yellow sticky note marking the spot. I glanced at the document, my stomach dropping when I noticed what appeared to be my mother's signature already there, perfect in every loop and curve. A forgery. "I'd like time to review these first," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, a momentary crack in his professional veneer. "There's nothing to review, Brittany. It's standard paperwork. Your mother and I discussed all this before her." He paused, clearing his throat. "Before her passing." My gaze drifted past him to the credenza where several framed photographs sat, Douglas and Miranda in Maui, arms around each other's waists, tropical drinks in hand. The caption might as well have read, "Celebrating my wife's death," instead of "New Horizons." The office door opened without a knock, and Miranda stepped in, wearing a cream-colored pencil skirt and silk blouse. Her smile appeared sympathetic, but her eyes were calculating. "I brought those projection figures you asked for," she said to my father, placing a folder beside him before turning to me. "Brittany, I'm so sorry for your loss. Your father has worked so hard to keep the company together through all this." I nodded stiffly, noting how she positioned herself slightly behind my father's chair, her hand resting possessively on its leather back. "We need to finalize these transfers today," my father continued, pushing the folder closer to me. "The board is expecting resolution." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your mother would want this wrapped up quickly." The mention of my mother made something shift inside me. My eyes drifted to the wall behind him, where a family portrait hung, my father, mother, and me, at my college graduation. But what caught my attention wasn't the forced smiles or my mother's already thinning frame. It was what lay behind the portrait, a slight rectangular outline in the walnut paneling. A safe. And as my father turned to accept a document from Miranda, I caught a glimpse of the keypad, for digits still visible on the display. 0-4-2-7, April 27th. My mother's birthday. "I'll need to review these tonight," I said, reaching for the folder before he could protest. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by calculated relief. "Of course. Good girl." He leaned back, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I always knew you'd understand business. This transition will be smoother with your cooperation." I tucked the folder into my bag, feeling strangely calm. For the first time in my life, I saw my father clearly, not as the intimidating business titan I'd always feared, but as a man who completely underestimated me. "I'll bring them back tomorrow," I said, turning to leave. "Have Miranda set an appointment," he called after me. "I've got back-to-back meetings all day." I stepped into the elevator, expecting relief to wash over me now that I was away from his presence. Instead, I felt a strange clarity, like fog lifting from a familiar landscape to reveal unexpected terrain. The elevator doors nearly closed before a manicured hand stopped them. Miranda slipped inside, her perfume overwhelming in the confined space. "He's been through so much," she said, pressing the lobby button. "Losing Eleanor has been devastating for him." I studied her profile, noticing the careful application of her makeup, the practiced sympathy in her expression. "Interesting choice of words," I responded. "Losing her." Miranda's head snapped toward me, her composure slipping for just a moment. "Excuse me. People don't usually say someone lost a spouse when they died. They say they lost them when they go missing." I maintained steady eye contact. "Or when they're taken." Her perfect complexion flushed slightly. "Watch yourself, Brittany. Grief makes people irrational." "Actually," I said, as the elevator doors opened to the lobby, "I'm thinking more clearly than ever." I stepped out, feeling her eyes burning into my back as I crossed the marble floor toward the revolving doors. Through the glass walls, I saw Miranda already on her phone, lips moving rapidly as she glanced in my direction, reporting back to my father. No doubt, something had fundamentally shifted between us. For the first time in my life, I'd made Douglas Hayes uncomfortable in his own territory. The afternoon rain had lightened to a drizzle as I walked 6 blocks to Westlake Coffee, constantly checking to ensure I wasn't followed. Inside, Martha Keegan sat at a corner table, her hospital scrubs replaced by jeans and a raincoat. Beside her was a slender woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun. "Brittany," Martha said, standing to greet me. "This is Charlotte Wells, your mother's attorney." Charlotte's handshake was firm, her gaze assessing. "Your mother speaks highly of you." "The FBI needs concrete evidence of financial fraud," she continued without preamble, keeping her voice low. "They've been watching your father for months, but they need something definitive to move forward." Martha slid her phone across the table, showing security footage of a hospital corridor. "This was taken the night before your mother's supposed death. Douglas entering her room alone, 15 minutes before her first cardiac episode. I watched my father's familiar figure stride confidently past the nurse's station, checking his watch as he pushed open room 412. My phone vibrated with an incoming call, an unlisted number. I answered hesitantly. "Brittany." My mother's voice, weak but unmistakable. The offshore accounts were just the beginning. "There's more. Miranda isn't just his assistant, she's his partner in everything." I gripped the phone tighter. "How much do they know at the FBI?" A new voice joined the conversation. "Agent Morales, White Collar Crimes Unit. We have fragments, Miss Hayes, but we need the complete picture. Your father keeps a flash drive in his office safe. That's where he stores everything incriminating, too sensitive for servers or clouds." I thought of the safe behind the family portrait, the keypad displaying my mother's birthday. "I know how to get it." Martha leaned forward. "How?" "I've been invisible to him my whole life." "That's about to become useful." I explained what I'd seen, the safe, the keypad code, my access card that still worked after hours. Charlotte tapped her pen against her legal pad. "If you're caught, it's breaking and entering." "I'm an employee entering my workplace," I countered, "and the documents in that safe may prove he tried to kill my mother." Martha checked her watch. "I can create a diversion. A call about a discrepancy in your mother's medical records. That should keep security busy for at least 15 minutes. Charlotte tore a sheet from her pad, writing rapidly. "I'll have these documents ready in case you're questioned. Legal representation. Cease and desist against any charges your father might fabricate." I looked between these women, strangers days ago, now risking everything to help me. A realization washed over me, powerful in its simplicity. "My whole life I've been afraid of him," I whispered. "Not anymore." Night fell as I drove back to the Hayes building, city lights reflecting in puddles from the day's rain. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to my father's moves. I was making my own. The underground parking garage was nearly empty at 9 p.m. I used my employee access card at the service entrance, heart thudding as the reader blinked green. Martha's diversion must have worked. The security desk was vacant. A half-eaten sandwich and coffee abandoned. I disabled the hallway camera with the phone jammer Martha provided, then made my way to the executive floor. Each step echoed in the empty corridor, my breath coming in shallow bursts. My father's office door yielded to my employee keycard. Inside, darkness was broken only by the city lights filtering through rain-streaked windows. I moved to the family portrait, fingers trembling as I slid it aside to reveal the keypad. 0427. Nothing happens. I try again, more carefully. 0427. Still nothing. My mind races. What if he changed it? What if I misread the numbers? I closed my eyes, forcing myself to think. April 27th. My mother's birthday. But the company started in 1987. Maybe. 042787. The safe clicked open. Inside, organized with my father's typical precision, were folders labeled with offshore bank accounts, transfer records, and contracts for shell companies I'd never heard of. And there, nestled between them, a black flash drive labeled simply, confidential. As I pulled it out, something else caught my eye. A photograph of my mother, her smiling face marred by a red X drawn across it. My hands shook as I slotted the flash drive into my laptop, quickly copying its contents. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. Douglas Hayes. You think I wouldn't notice, Brittany? A second message followed immediately. A security alert showing my father's car entering the parking garage. I quickly replaced the flash drive, closed the safe, and slid the portrait back into position. The elevator indicator in the hallway showed the car rising from the parking level. There's nowhere to run. I stood in the center of my father's office, evidence clutched in my hand, and made my decision. No more running. My heart pounded against my ribs as I quickly returned every document to its exact position in the safe. With trembling fingers, I pressed one thumb deliberately against the metal edge, leaving a single fingerprint, a calculated breadcrumb. The conference room adjoining my father's office offered the only escape route, its door ajar just enough for me to slip through as the elevator dinged in the main hallway. From my hiding place, I watched Douglas stride into his office with Miranda trailing behind him like a sleek shadow. Their reflections distorted in the glass walls as they moved directly to the portrait concealing the safe. She's been here, Douglas muttered, examining the keypad with narrowed eyes. His voice carried through the thin wall as he swung the safe door open, inspecting the contents. Miranda pressed a manicured hand against the wall, leaning closer. She couldn't have gotten far, security is watching all exits. Check her office, Douglas ordered, slamming the safe shut with enough force to rattle the family portrait. I want to know exactly what she took. I pressed myself against the wall as they split up, Miranda's heels clicking toward the elevator while Douglas rifled through papers on his desk. The moment they were both distracted, I slipped into the service corridor, the forgotten passageway maintenance uses, its existence overlooked on building schematics, but essential to my architectural knowledge of the Hayes building. The flash drive burned in my pocket as I navigated the dimly lit hallway, past storage closets and electrical panels, emerging finally into the parking garage 2 floors below. The next morning, my phone erupted with notifications. 12 missed calls from Douglas, 8 from Miranda. 3 voicemails, each more threatening than the last. Come home, Brittany. Let's talk this through like adults, my father's voice said in the first message, deceptively calm. The second, whatever you think you have, it won't hold up. You're making a terrible mistake. The third chilled my blood. Perhaps another funeral will be needed if this continues. Your choice. When I arrived at work, whispers followed me through the corridors. My office door stood open though I'd locked it yesterday. Inside, drawers hung open, files displaced, my computer obviously searched. From across the office landscape, I spotted Miranda huddled with my coworker Jessica, both glancing my way with furrowed brows. We're concerned about her mental state, Miranda said loudly enough for me to hear. Grief affects people in unpredictable ways. By lunchtime, my corporate credit card was declined at the cafe across the street. When I checked my banking app, access had been revoked. A notification appeared from Hayes Financial Services, accounts temporarily frozen for your protection during this difficult time. Outside my apartment that evening, an unfamiliar black sedan idled across the street, its occupant obscured behind tinted windows. When I drove to the grocery store, the same car followed 3 lengths behind. I didn't return home that night. "You've got enough for us to start moving," Charlotte told me over a secure line from a budget hotel room I'd paid for in cash. Her voice was firm with restrained excitement. "I've transferred the files to a secure server. Agent Morales confirmed they've traced 2 shell companies already." "Is my mother safe?" I asked, watching raindrops trace jagged patterns down the window. "Martha arranged secure transportation to the safe house yesterday," Charlotte answered. "They've doubled security precautions." "He's going to keep coming after me," I said, watching headlights sweep across the parking lot, checking for the black sedan. "That's what cornered predators do," Charlotte replied. "But evidence doesn't disappear just because he wants it to." I remembered the countless times my father's disapproval silenced me, how his raised eyebrow could redirect my entire life's trajectory. "He taught me to fear him," I whispered. "Now I'll teach him to fear the truth." 2 days later, Douglas called an emergency family meeting at my Aunt Susan's house. I didn't attend, but the details reached me through Susan's furious phone call afterward. "He had the nerve to say you're unwell with grief," Susan fumed. "Talked about temporary guardianship proceedings," Brittany said you're not yourself and need supervision. "What did everyone say?" I asked, pacing the new hotel room, my 3rd in 5 days. "Dr. Levin refused to sign anything, said he'd examined you after your mother's funeral, and found you perfectly sound," Susan explained. And I asked some pointed questions about his relationship with Miranda. "The timing seemed convenient," I said. I smiled faintly, picturing my father's face as his usually compliant family questioned him. "There's more," Susan continued. 3 board members received anonymous emails about financial irregularities. Douglas is furious, demanding an investigation into corporate espionage. Charlotte called that evening, her voice triumphant. "We've filed an emergency injunction against the guardianship attempt." Martha provided a sworn statement about the medication tampering. "They can't touch you legally now." Even better news arrived the following day. Eleanor recorded a video testimony with the FBI, Agent Morales told me during our secure call. "Date stamped and notarized. We're ready to move on the financial charges, but we need you at the safe house. A car will pick you up at 8 tonight." The black sedan no longer followed me, Douglas's attention now diverted by the legal storm brewing around him. In its place, an unmarked federal vehicle maintained discreet distance, ensuring my safety until I reached the safe house. I watched Seattle's familiar skyline recede in the rearview mirror, rain washing down the windows as we head toward Portland. My phone buzzed with news notifications. Hayes Development stock drops 17% on governance concerns. Another text arrived from my father. "This can all go away, Brittany. One meeting? That's all I ask." I didn't respond. The next morning brought a federal subpoena for Douglas' financial records, according to Charlotte's update. 3 board members had requested an emergency meeting. Miranda's deleted all her Instagram photos with him, Martha told me when I finally arrived at the safe house, exhaustion washing over me as I crossed the threshold into safety. "She's distancing herself, rats deserting the sinking ship." My mother waited inside, pale but standing, her eyes bright with resolve. For the first time since the funeral, we embraced, planning our final confrontation while rain taps against the windows. That evening, an unexpected text arrived from Miranda. "He's not who I thought he was. Be careful." Agent Morales updated us as darkness fell. He appeared on a business news segment today, looked disheveled, kept losing his train of thought. "He's liquidating accounts, Brittany. Making preparations to flee." My mother and I exchanged glances across the safe house kitchen table, both recognizing the cornered animal preparing for escape. I thought of all the times Douglas Hayes made others run from him, all the lives disrupted by his calculated cruelty. "No," I said, finally feeling strength replace fear. "He's not running from this. Not from us." 2 nights later, headlights sliced through the pouring rain, sweeping across the safe house windows as a car screeched to a halt in the gravel driveway. Mom, just as we'd planned, retreated into the hallway, out of sight but within earshot. Charlotte stood poised, phone in hand, Agent Morales on speed dial. Then came the pounding. A deafening, furious hammering on the door that vibrated through the entire small house. "Open up, Brittany. Let's end this game." My father's voice, bellowing through the wood. I took a deep breath, counted to 10, and opened the door. Rain lashed sideways, instantly drenching Douglas Hayes. His tailored suit clung to his frame, his usually perfect silver hair plastered to his forehead. He looked disheveled, yes, but the raw power still radiated from him, that same intimidating energy that had kept me compliant for 28 years. I stepped back, letting him burst inside without a word. He tracked rainwater across the hardwood floor, his eyes blazing. "You've destroyed everything." His voice shook, barely controlled fury. "Years of work, my reputation, the company, all because you couldn't simply sign the papers." I met his gaze, unflinching. I refused to look away, something I never would have done before. "Is that why you're here?" I asked, my voice steady. "For my signature? You don't understand what's at stake." He ran a hand through his wet hair, pacing the small living room like a caged predator. "Your mother was going to ruin everything I built. She never understood business, the necessary sacrifices." "Douglas." The single word, calm and clear, sliced through his tirade. He froze mid-sentence, the color draining from his face as Mom stepped out of the hallway, into the light. She looked frail, yes, but utterly resolute. Her presence was undeniable. "You tried to erase me," she said quietly, her eyes locked on his. He stared, as if seeing a ghost. Which, in his warped mind, he probably was. "You don't understand what she took from me," he whispered, hoarse. "Mom took another step forward. You took everything." His composure fractured completely. With a guttural roar, he lunged for Mom. But he never reached her. The front door burst open. FBI agents flooded the room, Agent Morales leading the charge, weapons drawn. Through the rain-streaked window, I caught a glimpse of Miranda in a car across the street, her face pale in the dashboard light. "Douglas Hayes," Morales announced, his voice sharp and clear. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and attempted homicide." As they cuffed him, I stepped closer, meeting his eyes one final time. "You were under investigation the moment you moved that money offshore," I said, my voice low but firm. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice those transfers?" "I'm an architect, Dad." I noticed details. Mom approached slowly, her voice steady now, tinged with a quiet sadness. "You destroyed yourself, Douglas." Charlotte, holding a thick evidence binder, walked in. "We have everything, Douglas. Miranda has agreed to cooperate as a state's witness." Agent Morales began listing the charges as another agent documented the arrest. Offshore accounts totaling $4.8 million in fraudulent transfers. Phone recordings where you stated, and I quote, "She's worth more dead than alive." Medication tampering documented by Nurse Keegan. My father looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched as the crushing weight of his situation finally sank in. His eyes found mine, a desperate, final appeal. "I'm still your father," he said, his voice barely audible above the rain drumming on the roof. I studied his face, the man I'd feared and admired my entire life. "Not anymore." They led him out to the waiting FBI vehicle. Miranda's statement was already on record, a full confession for reduced charges. Mom watched from the doorway, supported by Charlotte, as the car containing Douglas disappeared into the storm. "It's finally over," Mom whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of relief and exhaustion. I put my arm around her shoulders, feeling the fragility of her frame, but also the immense strength of her spirit. Lightning flashed, illuminating our reflection in the window, mother and daughter, survivors, together. My phone buzzed. Martha's name on the screen, followed by 5 words that sent a chill down my spine. "This isn't over. Trial next." Rain tapped against the courthouse windows as I sat beside my mother in the front row. The Oregon courtroom felt lighter than it should, despite the weight of the last 6 months hanging in the air. At the defense table, my father slumped, unshaven and hollow-eyed in his prison jumpsuit. I barely recognized him anymore. The prosecutor closed her binder with a decisive thump. The state has demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt that Douglas Hayes attempted to murder his wife, commit financial fraud, and manipulate evidence. My mother squeezed my hand as Charlotte approached the stand with our final evidence. I watched the jury's faces as she displayed the flash drive contents on the courtroom monitor, offshore transfers, shell companies, and the photo of my mother with that hateful red X drawn across her face. When my turn came, I walked to the stand without trembling. The combination to my father's safe was my mother's birthday, I testified, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. He never imagined I would use that knowledge against him. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. When they returned with their verdict, the foreman's voice echoed through the silent courtroom. On all counts, we find the defendant guilty. 27 years. No possibility of parole for 18. Numbers that meant my father would be an old man before he breathed free air again. Later, Mom and I pushed through the courthouse doors to face a wall of reporters and camera flashes. Rain fell steadily around us, but neither of us bothered with umbrellas. Mom tilted her face upward, letting the droplets wash over her skin. "Different rain this time," she said softly. I looked at her profile, strong and serene despite everything. Different us. A reporter shoved a microphone toward my mother. "Mrs. Hayes, your ex-husband claimed in his final statement that he did it all for the family business. Any response?" Mom straightened her shoulders. "Some chapters need to end before others can begin." We drove along the coastal highway toward our home, windows cracked despite the weather. The scent of pine and salt air filled the car. "He made me believe strength was cruelty," I said, watching raindrops race across my window. "That standing up for myself meant hurting others." Mom turned toward me. "And now? I know the difference between power and strength." The judge's order still felt surreal. $3.2 million of seized assets directed to fund the Haven Project, the nonprofit my mother established to help women escape financial abuse. Not everything Douglas took, but enough to start building something that matters. Our coastal home appeared around the bend, weathered cedar shingles glowing warm against the gray sky. Inside, paintings leaned against walls waiting to be hung, my mother's work for her gallery reopening next month in Portland. In the studio overlooking the ocean, architectural plans for the Haven Project's first building spread across my drafting table. Martha visited the following weekend, bringing news that her nursing license had been fully restored. She joined us on the porch with mugs of coffee as Charlotte's car pulled into the driveway. "First celebration of many," Charlotte said, producing a bottle of champagne. The Haven Project's first client signed a lease on her new storefront yesterday. I thought of the young woman who approached me after my speech at the women's shelter last month, eyes brimming with tears. "You gave me hope," she'd whispered. "Hope is just the beginning," I'd told her. That evening, Mom and I sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the ocean copper. Wind rustled through coastal pines as night approached. "I've always wondered," I said, wrapping my hands around my mug. "Who sent that text that night at the cemetery?" "From your phone." Mom smiled softly. "It was Martha. She used my old phone." I nodded slowly. Then she saved both of us. My phone rings. A reporter asking about Douglas' appeal. I declined politely. "We don't need revenge to win," I tell Mom after hanging up. Just the truth. Morning arrived with unusual clarity. No rain today. Mom and I shared coffee on the porch as dawn spread across the water. "The gallery opens in 3 weeks," she says, pride evident in her voice. I glance at my laptop open to praise for my latest architectural project, no longer in my father's shadow, but standing in my own light. On the screen, applications from 3 more states requesting Haven Project branches. "Good night, Mom," I whisper into the morning wind, an old habit from the funeral that now carried a different weight. She smiles, understanding. For the first time since that rainy day at the cemetery, the sea before us is perfectly calm.